During Adolf Hitler's 12-year reign as Chancellor of Germany, countless attempts were made on his life. Most of them were never even close to kill him, but some failed only because of random events. The most famous plot to kill Hitler took place on the 20th of July 1944 at Hitler's famous headquarters on the Eastern Front, the Wolf's Lair. And it was really close for the Nazi dictator. For 2 years, the German general Henning von Tresckow had been an unofficial leader of an anti-Hitler fraction within the German army. General Tresckow served in the General Staff of the Army Group Center on the Eastern Front. Tresckow tried to recruit officers with views similar to his to the staff, making it the epicenter of Hitler resistance within the army. Other important opponents to Hitler was Major General Hans Oster, deputy head of military intelligence. Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben, former commander on the Western Front. Colonel General Ludwig Beck, former Chief of Staff at the German Army High Command. And not least General Friedrich Albrecht, head of the Army headquarters in Berlin. But the most famous participant in this coup attempt against Hitler was the 36-year-old Army Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg. Stauffenberg had been actively involved in the plans to assassinate Hitler since September 1943, and as a member of the Army's General Staff he would have access to Hitler, and was therefore a great asset to the conspirators. He took on a leading role in the plot after considering his seniors to be too weak and indecisive. The group's political views were mainly old-school nationalist and favored a Germany ruled by a monarch, preferably from the old Hohenzollern dynasty, rather than a Führer or a democratically elected president. As the war was going badly for Germany, the Gestapo considered it to be more and more likely that someone would try to assassinate and replace Hitler, and they rightfully became increasingly suspicious of the Army's General Staff. As the summer of 1944 was approaching, they were closing in on the conspirators. Some historians suggest that Himmler was aware of the coup plans, but chose to look the other way, as an assassination of Hitler could propel Himmler into the role of Führer in exchange for starting peace negotiations with the Allies. On Saturday, July 1, 1944, Colonel von Stauffenberg was appointed Chief of Staff of the Home Army, meaning Stauffenberg would now regularly meet Hitler at the Führer's military conferences in Prussia, the Obersalzberg and in Berlin. The plan now was to assassinate Hitler, and then deploy the reserve army to take control over Germany by seizing all important civilian as well as military infrastructure in Germany, crippling the supply lines of the army on the Eastern Front and of the SS. This plan has gone down in history as Operation Valkyrie. In France, the conspirators had managed to recruit General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, who would make sure the army in France would be loyal to the coup makers. The first planned attempt to kill Hitler was on the 7th of July, when General Helmut Stief was to shoot Hitler at a display of new uniforms at Klesheim Castle near Salzburg. Stief, however, could not make himself to shoot Hitler, and by failing to do so, convinced Stauffenberg that he would have to do it himself. A week later, Stauffenberg was to execute an attempt to kill both Hitler, Himmler and Göring with a bomb hidden in a suitcase. The conspirators believed that all three would have to be killed for the operation to be successful. Stauffenberg brought the bomb into the conference with Hitler and Göring, but since Himmler was not present he did not detonate it. After this, the conspirators decided to drop the plans of assassinating all the top 3 Nazis at once. Killing only Hitler would suffice. Just a few hours later, Stauffenberg attended a conference in the Wolf's Lair with both Hitler, Himmler and Göring present. He discreetly managed to place the suitcase and set the timer, but as Hitler was called out of the room, Stauffenberg quickly and discreetly intercepted the detonator. A few days later, rumors reached Stauffenberg that the Gestapo was closing in on him, and that he had to act now, or else he probably would have to try to flee to Switzerland, or across the Allied lines in France. This probably wasn't true, but he nevertheless decided that he had to use the next chance he got, as it might be his last. On the 20th of July, Stauffenberg flew back to the Wolf's Lair. A few minutes before the conference started, he asked to use a washroom in Wilhelm Keitel's office to change his sweaty shirt and freshen up after the flight from Berlin. Together with his assistants, Stauffenberg set the detonator to detonate in about 10 minutes. The original plan was to use 2 bombs, but due to Stauffenberg's injuries from earlier in the war, he only had 3 fingers, which slowed him down significantly. As Stauffenberg entered the conference room, he placed the suitcase under the table close to Hitler. A few minutes later he received a planned telephone call, and had to be excused. The bomb went off at 12:42. A stenographer was killed instantly, while 3 injured officers later died from the injuries. One of these was Colonel Heinz Brandt. Brandt was probably the man who pushed the briefcase behind one of the massive legs on the table, giving Hitler some shield against the blast. Hitler survived the attack with only minor injuries. Conjunctivitis in his right eye, and like most of the other participants, he suffered from a perforated eardrum. His pants, however, was totally shattered, as we can see in this picture. After leaving the conference as the bomb went off, von Stauffenberg and his aide, who was now convinced that Hitler was dead, managed to bluff their way past 3 guarded checkpoints and rushed for a close-by airfield where a plane requisitioned by fellow conspirator, General Eduard Wagner, was waiting. Already at 1300 hours, 18 minutes after the blast in the Wolf's Lair, Stauffenberg was airborne. The colonel arrived in Berlin about 3 hours later. Before he reached Berlin, an accomplice, General Erich Feldjebel, who was present at the Wolf's Lair, had telephoned the other conspirators in Berlin, telling them Hitler had survived the blast. As Stauffenberg met with his fellow conspirators right after getting off the plane, he convinced them that Hitler was dead. A confused General Albrecht issued orders for Operation Valkyrie to be set into motion. Albrecht's superior, General Frum, hesitated, and telephoned Field Marshal Keitel at the Wolf's Lair. Keitel confirmed that Hitler was alive with only minor injuries, but he demanded to know the whereabouts of Colonel Stauffenberg. Frum now knew that the plot was traceable back to his staff, making himself exposed and at danger. As Operation Valkyrie was set in motion, General Stulpnagel in France succeeded in disarming both the SS and the SD in a very short time, and in Prague, Vienna and other major cities in occupied Europe, the army arrested several high-ranking Nazis. In Berlin, orders were issued to a battalion in the reserve army to occupy central Berlin and to arrest propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. At 1900 hours in the evening, Hitler had recovered sufficiently to make phone calls, and he immediately phoned Goebbels in Berlin. Goebbels then arranged for Hitler to speak to Major Riemer, commander of the troops surrounding the ministry, convincing him to take his troops and move to Bendlerblock and surround the facilities where the perpetrators of the coup were holding up. At 2300 hours the same evening, the troops loyal to Hitler had regained control of the premises. General Frum arranged for a swift court-martial of his fellow conspirators, most likely to hide his own involvement in the coup attempt. 4 officers, among them Albrecht and Stauffenberg, were sentenced to death, and already at 0:10 they were executed in the courtyard at Bendlerblock. SS troops under Otto Skorzeny arrived on the scene 20 minutes later and forbade further executions. In the coming weeks and months, more than 7,000 people were arrested and nearly 5,000 killed as a result of intense Gestapo investigations, pressured by an impatient Hitler who wanted all the officers implicit in the coup attempt executed. Most of the accomplices chose to commit suicide, including Henning von Tresckow, who went into no man's land between Soviet and German lines, and committed suicide with a hand grenade. General Eduard Wagner was convinced the Gestapo would find out about him, and committed suicide by shooting himself on July 23. General Kluge in France committed suicide a month after the failed coup attempt, when he was being summoned for a meeting with Hitler in Berlin. Karl-Heinrich von Stülpnagel was convicted of treason and executed on August 30. General Fromm's plan to execute his fellow conspirators to save himself didn't work, and he was arrested in the morning of the 22nd of July. The Gestapo could not find evidence that Fromm was a part of the conspiracy, but he was eventually convicted for cowardice in the face of the enemy and executed on March 12, 1945.